You open your eyes in total darkness. That's exactly how it should be. No windows, no lamps. Priests of Amun don't wake up to sunlight, they wake up before it. In a few minutes, you'll wash yourself for the third time since yesterday. You'll shave every hair off your body. You'll put on clothing made from a single fiber. Anything else is considered unclean in the eyes of a god. You think this job is about humility. It isn't. By the end of this, you'll understand something. How a man in a plain linen robe ended up richer than most kings in history. And how one pharaoh got so scared of that fact, he tried to erase the god you serve from existence. The year is around 1400 BCE. The place is Thebes, the religious capital of Egypt. The temple is Karnak, the largest religious complex ever built by human hands. It's still standing today. You aren't born into this job. You're chosen. Sometimes it runs in families. Sometimes the king appoints you directly. Sometimes you simply have the right connections. Either way, once you're in, your life splits into two completely different versions of you. For 1 month you live inside the temple grounds. You're washed. You're shaved. You're dressed only in linen. Wool is banned. It comes from an animal, and animals die. During this month, you belong to the god, body and schedule. Then, for the next 3 months, you go home. You farm, you trade, you raise your children like anyone else in Thebes. Then you come back, and you do it again. This rotating system has a name. The priests call it the Phyle system. 4 rotating crews, sharing the sacred workload all year round. It sounds efficient. It sounds almost bureaucratic. You didn't need to memorize a single scripture to get this job. What you needed was literacy. Before you ever touched a sacred statue, you trained in a building attached to the temple. It's called the Ankh, the House of Life. There, you learn to read and write hieroglyphs. You learn to copy medical texts. You learn to record grain shipments and track goods moving in and out of the temple's storerooms. Most Egyptians in Thebes can't read a single word. You can read contracts, tax records, shipping manifests, in a language most of your own neighbors will never understand. That skill alone puts you closer to the machinery of power than almost anyone outside the palace. But here's the detail that matters most. That same rotation and that same literacy are exactly how an entire class of part-time priests ends up controlling one of the largest economies in the ancient world. We'll get to what all that time off was actually paying for. Your first duty of the day happens before the sun clears the horizon. You walk through a temple designed to get darker the deeper you go. The outer courts are open to the sky, but the inner sanctuary is small, sealed, black. You aren't the only one in the room. Above you sits a strict hierarchy, and you feel it every single morning. The first prophet of Amun, the man everyone simply calls the High Priest, is the only one who is technically allowed to perform this ritual at all. In practice, he can't be everywhere at once, so he delegates it to men like you. Lower-ranking priests, trained specifically to stand in for him. But the moment he walks into the sanctuary, everyone else steps back. Rank in this temple isn't a suggestion. It's enforced with the same precision as the ritual itself. Below the first prophet sits the second prophet, then the third, then the fourth, each one overseeing a different slice of the temple's operations. The treasury, the granaries, the herds of cattle grazing on temple land. You report to someone. That someone reports to someone else. And at the very top of that chain sits a man who, on any given day, might be more influential in Thebes than the local governor appointed by the king. Ordinary Egyptians never see this room. Not once, not ever. Only the king and the priesthood are permitted past these doors. Because the temple isn't a place of public worship, it's a house. Literally, a home for a god who is believed to physically reside inside a statue less than 3 feet tall. You break the clay seal on the shrine doors. You wash the statue. You dress it in fresh linen and jewelry. You burn incense to mask any smell that might offend it. Then you back out of the room, sweeping your own footprints from the floor behind you, so no trace remains that a mortal ever stood there. This happens every single day. Not for a crowd, not for a ceremony anyone will see, for an audience of one god watched by nobody. 3 times before dawn, you'll wash yourself again in a sacred pool near the temple gates. Every hair on your head and body stays shaved. Every few days without exception. A single stray hair is considered a source of impurity in a space this sacred. Your sandals are made of papyrus, not leather. Leather comes from a dead animal, and death has no place inside this building. You're not allowed to eat certain fish. You're not allowed to eat certain vegetables the god is said to dislike. Your entire diet, your entire wardrobe, your entire daily rhythm, all built around one single goal: staying clean enough, in a ritual sense, to stand a few feet from a god and not offend him. When your month of service ends, you walk out through the same gates you entered. For 3 months, nobody expects you to be a priest at all. You go back to a house with mud, brick walls, and a courtyard full of chickens. You plant barley along the edge of the Nile floodplain, the same way your father did, the same way farmers all over Egypt do every season. Your neighbors know you serve at Karnak. But out here, that title buys you very little. You still have to carry water. You still have to repair your own roof before the rains. But you're not quite an ordinary farmer either. You can read the boundary markers on your land when a dispute breaks out. You can check the tax assessor's numbers against your own harvest count, instead of simply trusting whatever figure he writes down. In a country where most disputes are settled by whoever can read the contract out loud, that alone puts you a step ahead of almost everyone around you. And every 4 months, without fail, you go back through the gates, back into the dark, back to the God who never once acknowledges that you were ever gone. Here's the part most people never learn in school. Every day, mountains of bread, beer, meat, and produce are formally presented to the god as an offering. The god, of course, does not eat, so the food gets redistributed, first to the highest-ranking priests, then further down the chain, all the way to the temple staff. Egyptians call this the reversion of offerings. In plain terms, feeding the god is how the entire priesthood gets paid, in food, in goods, in real material wealth, every single day. Tax-free. Multiply that by hundreds of priests, thousands of staff, and centuries of practice, and you start to see where this is going. By the time you're serving at Karnak, the temple isn't just a religious building. It's a landlord, a bank, an employer, all at once. Temple records from this era describe herds of cattle, numbering in the tens of thousands, ships, granaries stretching across the Nile Valley, gold shipped in directly from mines in Nubia. Land Egypt controls specifically because it's rich in the one metal that funds an empire. At its peak, the Temple of Amun reportedly controlled a share of Egypt's farmland so large that some estimates place it near 1/5 of all cultivated land in the entire country, worked by tens of thousands of laborers who never see the inside of that sealed sanctuary you clean out every morning. And it isn't only land and gold. Temple inventories from this period list workshops for weaving linen, workshops for carving stone, entire fleets of boats used to move grain up and down the Nile. The temple employs bakers, brewers, goldsmiths, sculptors, farmers, and soldiers to guard its own storehouses. Karnak isn't paying taxes to the crown on most of this. Temple land is in large part exempt. So while ordinary farmers hand over a share of every harvest to the king's collectors, the temple simply keeps what it grows, mines, and trades. You joined a religious order. You ended up inside the largest privately run economy on earth, one that, unlike the king's own treasury, answers to almost nobody. The High Priest of Amun, the man who oversees everything you do, doesn't just outrank you spiritually. He sits in on royal decisions. He advises on foreign policy. When the king needs loyal troops for a border campaign, some of that manpower comes straight out of temple estates. Men who technically work for a god, but who show up armed when Karnak asks them to. You start to notice something the longer you serve. The pharaoh is called a living god on every monument in the country. But the man who controls the food, the gold, the land records, and a fair share of the soldiers isn't sitting on the throne in the capital. He's standing a few feet away from you every morning, watching you sweep your own footprints off the sanctuary floor. Here's where everything you just heard stops being background information and starts being a threat. Because a system this wealthy doesn't stay quiet forever. Eventually, a king notices. His name is Amenhotep IV. He inherits a throne, sitting next to an institution that may, by this point, rival the crown itself in land, gold, and loyal manpower. And according to many historians, he decides he isn't going to share power with a god's bank account any longer. So he does something no pharaoh had done before. He changes his own name to Akhenaten. He declares that only one god exists, the Aten, the sun disk itself. He orders the name of Amun chiseled off monuments across Egypt, one hieroglyph at a time. He shuts down Karnak's operations. He builds an entirely new capital city out in the desert, far from Thebes, far from the priesthood you belong to. For a few years your god officially does not exist. Every priest who served Amun loses their position. The temple workshops fall silent. The daily ritual you performed every morning, the washing, the dressing, the sweeping of footprints, simply stops. For the first time in centuries, thousands of people who depended on the temple for food, for wages, for a place in society, lose all of it. almost overnight. Then Akhenaten dies. His successor is a teenage boy, originally named Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten. Within a few years of taking the throne, his name is changed. He becomes Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. The old religion is restored, monument by monument. And the priesthood you serve doesn't just survive the attempt to erase it. It comes back wealthier than before. Land that briefly reverted to the crown is transferred right back to temple control. New buildings rise at Karnak, bigger than the ones Akhenaten tried to silence. Kings who follow spend decades restoring what one pharaoh tried to erase in a single reign. Almost as if the attempt itself had proven exactly how necessary the priesthood really was. And roughly 300 years later, the position you hold, High Priest of Amun, reaches its final form. A man named Herihor holds that exact title in Thebes. And he starts doing something no priest had ever done. He writes his own name inside a royal cartouche. The oval symbol reserved, by law and by religion, for kings alone. A priest who started his career sweeping his own footprints out of a sealed, windowless room ends up, generations later, signing his name like a king. By this point in Egyptian history, the king in the north technically still rules the country. But in the south, in Thebes, in the very temple you served, the High Priest of Amun effectively runs the government, collecting taxes, commanding soldiers, controlling more farmland than most kingdoms in the ancient world. The office that started as a sunrise ritual for an audience of one had by then quietly become the government itself. So what does a life like this actually add up to? It means the life of a priest of Amun was never really about a single man's devotion. It was about an institution so quietly efficient at collecting wealth that even a king with an army couldn't fully shut it down. You woke up in total darkness this morning and swept your own footprints from a floor no one else would ever see. That single, invisible act, repeated by thousands of men across hundreds of years, built something that outlasted an emperor's attempt to erase it by force. Empires rise and fall throughout Egyptian history. But somewhere behind almost every one of them sits a temple, a ledger, and a man in a plain linen robe, quietly deciding who actually gets paid. If you want to know exactly how Akhenaten's religious revolution collapsed, and why Egypt worked so hard afterward to erase his name too, that story is next. If you want the history your textbook left out, subscribe. That's what this channel is.